This video does not confirm or diagnose any medical condition. All health-related mentions are alleged and discussed strictly for general commentary and informational purposes only.
Yeah, that's she's delivering a spirit amongst young girls. She's introducing. We've had a gangster spirit. The gangster spirit damn near wiped the young black males out. This spirit is fit to do a number on the young black girl.
Y'all, this isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is the kind of story Hollywood prays never sees daylight. Behind the red carpets, luxury parties, and flawless Instagram images, something far darker is being whispered about. And this time, the spotlight is locked on an insider who claims she knows exactly how deep the rot goes. According to explosive claims now ripping through social media, a well-known figure from the music and film world has triggered panic by hinting at serious, hidden health-related allegations involving multiple A-list stars. No names have been officially confirmed, but the implications alone were enough to send shockwaves across the industry. Sources suggest these allegations point to a reckless, secretive lifestyle where power, silence, and protection mattered more than consequences. Behind closed doors, insiders allege there were private gatherings, risky encounters, ironclad NDAs, and a culture where image was guarded at all costs, even if others were allegedly placed in danger. When the insider went live, her voice wasn't calm or calculated. It was emotional, angry, and nearly broken. She insisted this was not about clout or revenge, but about truth, accountability, and the damage caused when fame shields dangerous behavior. Almost instantly, the internet erupted. Fans began questioning everything they thought they knew. Comment sections turned into digital war zones, and suddenly old rumors, blind items, and long-deleted posts started resurfacing. Together, they painted a picture far more disturbing than many were prepared to confront. But the darkest twist came next. Insiders claim the backlash wasn't random. Pressure allegedly mounted behind the scenes. Threats were whispered about, and powerful figures reportedly worked overtime to discredit the messenger instead of addressing the message. Now, the question haunting Hollywood is painfully simple. If even a fraction of these allegations are true,
Got HPV? I bet she done had chlamydia, gonorrhea, trigonometry, cryopts, and whatever else that can contract. Hell, you talking about she too motherfucking nasty, mannish, filthy at the mouth, and she ain't got them $100 weed. Everybody done.
what began as just another late-night livestream quickly turned into a moment that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. This wasn't the kind of controversy brushed off as internet noise. It was the kind insiders whisper about but never publicly confirm. The kind that makes lawyers sit up, PR teams scramble, and powerful figures suddenly go quiet. At the center of it all was a woman who knew the system from the inside. She wasn't an outsider chasing clout or a random voice online. She was someone who had lived behind the velvet ropes, attended the private gatherings, and witnessed firsthand how silence was bought and truth was buried. When she spoke, her voice didn't sound rehearsed or calculated. It sounded heavy, like someone carrying secrets never meant to see daylight. She didn't name names and she didn't need to. Instead, she described a pattern, a dark and unsettling one. She spoke of a culture where fame allegedly shields recklessness, where certain high-profile figures lived double lives, hiding dangerous behavior behind money, power, and carefully crafted public images. Publicly flawless, privately untouchable. Her words landed less like gossip and more like testimony. She talked about secrecy and hidden encounters, about partners who trusted faces they had grown up idolizing, and about how image protection allegedly mattered more than human consequences. As the live stream unfolded, viewers noticed something deeply unsettling. She wasn't angry for attention. She was emotional, almost breaking, as if reliving moments she wished she could erase. She insisted this wasn't about destroying careers. According to her, it was about stopping a cycle that allegedly placed innocent people at risk while the industry chose to look the other way. Then came the reaction. Social media didn't simply respond, it erupted. Old blind items resurfaced. Archived interviews were replayed. Lyrics that once seemed harmless suddenly sounded different. Fans began connecting dots that had been dismissed for years as baseless rumors. Comment sections transformed into digital courtrooms, filled with strangers arguing over guilt, responsibility, and silence. But the backlash didn't stop with the public. According to sources close to the situation, pressure mounted quickly behind the scenes. Calls were allegedly made. Warnings were allegedly delivered. Her credibility was questioned within hours. The narrative shifted almost overnight, not to address the claims themselves, but to discredit the messenger. In this industry, reputation management often moves faster than truth. What made the situation even darker were her claims that this behavior wasn't accidental. She alleged that certain people knew the risks and still chose indulgence over responsibility, secrecy over accountability, and protection of status over protection of others. She described an industry where NDAs are weapons, where private doctors, private parties, and private jets create a world without witnesses, until someone decides to talk. And when she did, the cost was immediate. Online harassment followed. Threats allegedly surfaced. Her safety became a question mark. Almost instantly, the conversation shifted from "is this true?" to "why would she say this?" A familiar tactic when the truth becomes inconvenient. The focus moved away from the allegations and onto her motives, her past, and her credibility. Yet the most haunting part wasn't what she openly revealed. It was what she implied. That this wasn't isolated. That it wasn't just one person or one circle. That it was systemic, a culture built on silence, fear, and the protection of powerful men and women who were never told no. As news outlets cautiously reported the situation without specifics, conspiracy theories exploded. Some called her brave. Others labeled her reckless. But no one could fully dismiss the unease settling in, because even without names, the story felt uncomfortably real. Then came the twist that shifted everything. She suggested that the timing of this revelation wasn't a coincidence. She claimed she had been quietly blamed, targeted, and accused within private narratives, and that speaking out was the only way to stop being positioned as the sole villain in a story much bigger than herself. Whether that claim is true remains hotly debated. One thing, however, is undeniable. Hollywood didn't laugh this off. The music industry didn't rush to clap back. And the silence from certain corners has been louder than any denial. This isn't the end of the story. It's the opening statement. What comes next may be impossible to ignore.
The rap game since he was little, just like Weezy.
Yeah.
And his booty been ran through quite a bit. They called him ass-naked. Whoever his big daddy was threw him out ass-naked into the hallway. He was walking around in the hallway holding. Has actually appeared on a magazine cover together.
Damn. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Always able to call other on being a swish. Birds of a feather flock together.
The night after the live stream, the silence felt louder than the outrage itself. There were no denials, no official statements, no carefully worded apologies, just absence. And that absence told a story of its own. Behind the scenes, sources described an industry scrambling to regain control, not to clarify facts, but to contain damage. Meetings allegedly took place behind closed doors, far from cameras and public scrutiny. Phone calls were made that never appeared on records. Old alliances were quietly reactivated, because when power feels threatened, it doesn't argue loudly. It moves quietly. The woman at the center of the storm did not disappear, even though many expected her to. Instead, she appeared visibly shaken. Her posts became shorter. Her tone shifted from defiant to drained. Those close to her said the weight of what she had unleashed began to show in her face. She wasn't just fighting the internet anymore. She was fighting isolation. Friends stopped answering calls. Industry peers allegedly distanced themselves overnight. Invitations vanished. Doors that once opened effortlessly were suddenly closed. Not slammed, just quietly shut, as if she no longer existed. What haunted viewers most was her emotional unraveling. She spoke less about exposure and more about regret. Not regret for speaking out, but regret for believing that honesty would be met with accountability. She described a world where silence is currency, where loyalty is rewarded and truth is punished, and where those who break the code are made examples of. As the days passed, the online narrative shifted. Anonymous accounts began circulating counter-stories. Old clips were reposted out of context. Her character was questioned, her motives dissected, and the message became clear. If the claims couldn't be erased, the messenger could be destroyed. At the same time, something else was happening. Viewers started noticing patterns. Lyrics that once felt celebratory now sounded ominous. Interviews from years earlier resurfaced with unsettling undertones. Blind items that had once been dismissed as exaggerations suddenly aligned too closely to ignore. The internet didn't need names. It recognized behavior. And that recognition terrified people who had spent decades perfecting carefully controlled images. The woman hinted that what the public had seen was only a fraction of the full picture. She suggested documentation existed, that conversations had been recorded, and that messages had been saved, not out of malice, but out of self-protection. She spoke like someone who had learned too late that trust in this world can be dangerous. Her emotional state continued to deteriorate. She admitted fear. She admitted paranoia. She admitted sleeping with the lights on. Because when powerful figures feel cornered, intimidation doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like being followed. Sometimes it looks like knowing too much and not knowing who still stands with you. Then came the claim that shifted the tone entirely. She suggested that the explosion of her story was not a coincidence, but a reaction. According to her, whispers had already begun behind her back. Blame was allegedly being redirected quietly and strategically, and she refused to be sacrificed to protect a system built on denial. That statement reframed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just about exposure. It was about survival. Public opinion fractured. Some saw bravery. Others saw recklessness. But almost everyone felt discomfort, because the story wasn't clean enough to dismiss and not clear enough to confirm. Industry insiders began leaking vague confirmations without details. It's complicated. There's more context. People don't understand how deep this goes. None of them denied the culture, only the specifics, and that silence spoke volumes. As pressure mounted, her tone shifted again. This time it wasn't angry. It was resigned. She spoke about consequences, about knowing that once certain lines are crossed, there is no return to normal. Careers don't always end loudly, she said. Sometimes they erode quietly. She acknowledged that she expected to be painted as unstable, emotional, or vindictive, because those labels are easier to sell than accountability. As predicted, that narrative began spreading rapidly. What unsettled viewers most, however, was her final implication. She hinted that what she had revealed so far was only the surface layer. The real danger, she suggested, wasn't individual behavior, it was institutional protection. There were people, she implied, whose entire job was to clean messes before they ever reached daylight. And some messes were buried permanently. She paused before ending her last appearance, longer than usual, as if weighing the cost of the next sentence. Her eyes looked tired. Not dramatic, not performative, just exhausted. She said there are stories that destroy reputations, and stories that destroy lives, and the difference between the two is who controls the narrative first. Then she stopped posting. There were no updates, no explanations, no reassurance. Speculation exploded. Was she advised to stay silent? Was she threatened? Was she negotiating? Or was she simply overwhelmed by what happens when truth collides with power? Meanwhile, industry figures remained silent. A silence that felt rehearsed. No outrage. No lawsuits. No public denials. Just distance. That silence created its own accusation. Because when innocence is obvious, it tends to speak loudly. The final detail leaked quietly by someone claiming proximity to the situation reframed everything one last time. They alleged that the next phase wouldn't come through social media, but through channels far less visible and far more dangerous. Not interviews. Not live streams. Not posts. Records. And if those records ever surface, the story won't be about one person speaking out.
Bisexual, they do weird things in their house, and young men have left their house screaming to get away from them in their mentorship. Meek Mills, Bashir Gray, left that house screaming, August the only one that stayed, and I guess he was really sick.
The quiet didn't last. It never does. When someone disappears at the center of a storm like this, silence becomes a language of its own. Every hour without a post, every unanswered message, every canceled appearance began to feel deliberate. Not peaceful, strategic. As if decisions were being made far away from public view. In rooms where consequences are measured carefully and nothing is accidental. People close to the situation described a shift, not outward chaos, but controlled pressure. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that waits. The kind that gently reminds you who holds leverage and who doesn't. What unsettled observers most was how quickly the narrative machine adapted. Entertainment blogs stopped asking hard questions and began using softer language. Commentators pivoted from concern to speculation about emotional strain. Old interviews were reframed. Contexts were adjusted. Slowly, almost invisibly, the focus moved away from what was said and toward who said it. That shift wasn't accidental. According to industry insiders, crisis containment rarely starts with denial. It starts with reframing. You don't erase the story. You dilute it. You introduce doubt. You turn certainty into confusion. And once confusion sets in, the audience begins to argue with itself. That is exactly what happened. Online debates turned vicious. Support fractured. The same voices that once praised courage began questioning timing, motives, and stability. It became easier to analyze the speaker than to confront the implications of the claims. Behind closed doors, something else was unfolding. Those familiar with how power operates say documentation was quietly reviewed. Messages, old agreements, and conversations never meant to be public were allegedly examined. Not to release them, but to assess risk. To determine who might be exposed if the silence broke again. Because this was never just about one voice. It was about what that voice could unlock. The woman at the center of it all reportedly withdrew from public spaces entirely. Not as an act of surrender, but of calculation. Those close to her described someone emotionally exhausted, yet disturbingly clear-eyed. Someone who understood that the next move couldn't be impulsive. She knew attention has a shelf life. She knew outrage fades. She knew timing is everything, and that awareness alone made certain people nervous. Rumors began circulating that intermediaries had reached out. Not with threats, but with options. Silence. Distance. Resolution. The kind of conversations that don't happen unless something real is at stake. At the same time, others claimed warnings were delivered quietly. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just enough to remind someone that consequences exist without spelling them out. In certain circles, consequences don't require explanation. What shook the public wasn't what was confirmed. It was what wasn't denied. No firm rebuttals appeared. No aggressive legal challenges followed. Just vague statements about misinformation, context, and unfair speculation. Words chosen carefully to avoid specifics. And in moments like this, avoidance speaks louder than confrontation. Then came the leak. Not a screenshot. Not a recording. A description. Someone claiming proximity to the situation described material that allegedly exists. Not sensational on its own. Not explosive in a single moment, but cumulative. Patterns over time. Behaviors normalized. Concerns dismissed. Silence enforced. The kind of material that doesn't go viral overnight, but quietly changes how conversations are held forever. The tone of the discussion shifted again. This was no longer about belief. It was about possibility. And possibility made people uneasy. Because possibility suggests uncertainty. And uncertainty threatens carefully built narratives. The woman reappeared briefly. Not live. Not freely speaking. A controlled message. Short. Measured. Almost legal in tone. She didn't accuse. She didn't clarify. She simply stated that truth doesn't expire and silence doesn't erase harm. It felt less like a statement and more like a marker. A line drawn without noise. Speculation exploded once more. Some interpreted it as retreat. Others saw it as warning. Those familiar with how these situations unfold recognized it as positioning. Because in this world, the loudest voice rarely wins. The most patient one does. Meanwhile, The industry returned to business as usual on the surface. New releases, new headlines, new distractions. But underneath, unease lingered. People watched their words more carefully. Association subtly shifted. Invitations were reconsidered. Silence had altered behavior. And that may have been the point all along. The final development didn't come from the woman herself. It came from an unexpected place. An anonymous, unaffiliated individual hinted that processes had begun. Not public, not performative. Quiet reviews, private examinations, internal conversations that never reach headlines unless something goes wrong. No confirmation followed. No denial came either. Just the suggestion that this story had moved beyond entertainment and into spaces without cameras. What haunts this moment isn't outrage or scandal. It's uncertainty. Because if the claims were empty, they would have been crushed quickly. If they were harmless, they would have been mocked openly. Instead, they were absorbed, redirected, and buried beneath politeness. And politeness is often how systems protect themselves. The woman has not returned to explain. The industry has not returned to deny. The audience has been left to sit with discomfort. And maybe that's the most honest ending possible. Not closure. Not resolution. Just awareness. Because sometimes truth doesn't arrive as a confession or a verdict. Sometimes it arrives as a pause. A pause long enough for people to realize that the silence they're hearing isn't emptiness. It's pressure. And pressure, given time, has a way of forcing what's hidden to surface. This is where the story stops being entertainment and starts demanding accountability. What you've witnessed isn't a rumor spiraling out of control. It's a system revealing itself through hesitation. No dramatic denials. No clear rebuttals. Just carefully managed distance and polished avoidance. In an industry trained to respond instantly, that delay speaks louder than any statement ever could. The tragedy isn't just one voice risking everything to speak. It's how familiar the pattern feels. How quickly discomfort turns into distraction. How fast truth becomes inconvenient once powerful interests feel threatened. You're watching the cost of honesty play out in real time. And that cost is rarely paid by those with the most to lose. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about recognizing patterns. It's about asking why some stories vanish while others are buried under narrative noise. It's about understanding that when fame protects behavior, silence becomes a weapon. If this made you uncomfortable, it should have. If it made you angry, that reaction is valid. And if it made you question what you're usually told to ignore, then the message landed exactly where it was meant to. Awareness is dangerous to systems built on denial. So don't let this fade into another viral moment that disappears by next week. Pay attention to what happens next. Watch who stays quiet. Watch who distances themselves. Watch which conversations suddenly feel off limits. And most importantly, don't forget how this made you feel. Stories like this rely on public amnesia to survive. If you believe truth shouldn't be erased by power, stay engaged. If you believe silence shouldn't outweigh harm, keep watching. And if you want the full picture, the parts that never make headlines, you already know what to do. This isn't the end. It's the pressure point.